Good evening, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Today, we have our monthly session with Dr. Dan, a licensed psychotherapist and logotherapist, and mentor and coach. And today's topic is very, very pertinent to the time of the year, season with a reason, and finding meaning in money. And before we get started, Dr. Dan, can you introduce yourself a little bit to our audience or the online audience that will listen to this recording?
Absolutely, Sarah. Thank you so much for again having me. This is a wonderful. I love chatting with you and your group here and trying to help all the young people that are out there and their parents. So yes, I've been a licensed psychotherapist for about 25 years. I originally got my start 25 years ago working with young people in an intensive adolescent substance abuse treatment program. I always enjoy working with that age group. It's just, I find they are so full of potential and opportunity, and I really see it as my job to help them not limit that potential and opportunity and to make smart choices and meaningful choices. And what I've seen here in the past few years, especially post-COVID, is that age group, 17 to 24, 25 right now, really struggling to get focus, to find meaning, purpose, to know where they want to go and what they want to do in life. Traditional education has definitely changed in the past few years, and that has left a lot of them questioning and asking some really good questions. And so it's really my honor and opportunity to be able to help and provide some guidance along my studies of logotherapy, the psychology of meaning, existential analysis, and to try to help them avoid kind of that existential vacuum of meaninglessness.
Okay, awesome. Well, so I'm going to let you take over the floor and kind of give us a little bit of a background on how do we find reason or meaning, and especially at this time of the year when we're trying to buy gifts. And
Mhm.
it was a new thing for me coming from India when I started hearing that, oh my goodness, holiday stress. And for me, like holidays are meant to take off the stress. So why are people getting stressed out in holidays? So give us a little bit of, your take on how do you help people find the balance and really enjoy the holidays,
Mhm.
and then that balance of spending money for gifts and actually being meaningful, and things that you talk about to everybody.
Sure. I think every year, right after Thanksgiving in the US, I start to say these words much more often, whether it's on my podcast or in sessions with families and people. As people switch gears, it's a magical 4 week period here from Thanksgiving to Christmas. And it almost feels like there is a bit of pressure. There is that stress, and it's unfortunate. And a lot of what I do is try to relieve that stress. And I think the most significant way I do it, the thing I say the most, and this is more than just my opinion, this is well researched fact, probably in the past 2 decades. When buying gifts, experience is far better, more meaningful, healthier than material. If we purchase or find ways to give experiences to our children, to our loved ones, to our family and family members and coworkers, it will last far longer than the material gift that we open and look at and say, well, thank you very much. And may not even mean that. That might just go to the return pile somewhere or go sit on a shelf somewhere and collect dust. Or it may be valued for a brief amount of time, right? Whereas experience, especially for our children, when we look to share experiences with them, one of the things I've done in these past few years, we have a local theater here, and they've had some off Broadway kind of shows come in. We've seen Anastasia or maybe a version of Wicked or something like that, right? So South Bend, Indiana, not a huge city, but it has a bit of a theater. And I've always looked for either a play that my children, my daughters might like, or my wife even, or some kind of small concert, nothing too extravagant, and really focused on that as a main gift for them and the family. And what that's done right? So they open up a nice little silly box on the holiday, and it has the theater tickets or the concert tickets in there. It's, oh, Dad, this is great. I was really wanting to see this. This is wonderful. That builds anticipation, right? So not only is it something, it's different from an article that they'll look at and say, okay, thanks, and put to the side, but now they get to be thinking about that. They get to think about the experience. They get to prepare for it. And for any of you with daughters out there, that means often planning a wardrobe or what friends to take, or my goodness, are we going to take pictures and all these kinds of things. And for our family, I like to pair that with a nice meal, right? There's some, hey, you guys want to go out for sushi or pizza or burgers, or what would you like to do with that? So they get to anticipate the experience, and that's something to look forward. Um, and then of course we have the experience. We spend a day, we go out for a meal, and we enjoy the show or the theater, whatever it might be, the experience that it might be. Maybe it's a trip to, for us, Chicago or something like that, and we have a good time. And so then you have a good time at the experience, but then there's lifelong memories to remember too, right? Hey, Dad, remember when we went with Grandma and Grandpa to see that strange African band up north? Yeah, oh yeah, that was a really cool thing. And so it builds anticipation. You enjoy the experience, and then there are lifelong memories to have. And that, if I remember correctly, I think those play tickets last year were about as much as the Beats headphones my daughter really wants this year. Her second set, mind you, her second set. I can't believe I got that request the other day. Hey, Dad, can you get these for me for Christmas? I said, what? I swear your aunt got you some of those a couple years ago. Yeah, yeah, I know, but my friend borrowed them. That was a long conversation. So experience over material. Any thoughts on that or questions, Sarah?
Well, definitely. I think a lot of parents have already, and I know we've talked about that a lot, not just now, but over the years, whenever I've spoken to parents, and they agree, yes, of course, experience. But when it comes time, crunch time, then you have the Christmas tree, and then everyone's like, and especially kids. I think it's the whole society is just attuned to having that thing. So I don't know, like we've definitely moved away from it many, many years ago. It's not even a thing. So now what's happened, of course, when the children are younger, it's harder to take away all of that.
Hmm.
But now we just go away somewhere. Um, and the Christmas tree is not even a thing. And I think another reason that you mentioned existential vacuum, and I guess maybe you can explain that a little bit to
Sure.
people.
So yeah, and I do want to point out, even though I'm pontificating about experience over material, if you could see what's on the other side of my laptop over there, there are two relatively tall stacks of Amazon boxes. So we still do a little bit of material here. I don't want to come off claiming to be holier than anybody, but the one thing that I do really try to do this year, the girls are getting a lot of books, as we were talking before recording, a lot of books on adult, all those skills you don't learn in high school, like adult investing and saving money and things like that. So I hope they like them. Um, the existential vacuum. So that is a very prime premise in logotherapy, the psychology of meaning. This existential vacuum, when our striving to discover meaning in our lives is thwarted, when there are obstacles in the way, we feel this sense of longing for meaning. We feel this sense of Dr. Franco calls it the existential vacuum, the sense of meaninglessness and purposelessness, that we don't have a path to follow. We don't know where we're going. And where that relates to the holidays very often is when we are changing traditions, the absence of traditions, or the change in traditions. Maybe going from, many people talk about, I used to love when grandma would host everybody and my aunts and uncles and cousins were all there, and then grandma passes away and the family kind of drifts apart. That leaves this emotional void. And so that is something that we recognize. If that goes too long, this existential vacuum, our kids are prone to anxiety, depression, different, mental health issues, as well as true mental illness.
So do you think that we are buying more gifts or consuming more because we're trying to fill in some kind of a void that uh, yeah, and why do we have that void?
Wow. Well, if I could solve that, we would solve all the world's problems, right? So many reasons. We do, as we were chatting earlier, we live in cultures where our children, that age group of 16 to 24, 25, is the prime target for marketers and marketing because they are the largest demographic with what the marketers consider to be disposable income. What I often call it is mom and dad's income that they just, the kids like to spend. And so, and with their, again, we were talking earlier about helping kids get off the phone. Um, TikTok, Twitter, Snapchat, all these social media outlets are built to gather their attention and sell them more things. And when they can't get those things, or they can't compare to their peers, if that is left unmitigated, if they aren't given the help to figure out that it's going to be okay, that can really lead to a sense of loss, sadness, existential vacuum. And I think sometimes as parents, we don't want our kids to feel that pain. And so sometimes, yeah, we do buy a little bit too much.
So can you give an example? Let's talk adults because uh, I don't think a newborn infant has an existential vacuum, right? Right?
Hope
I mean,
not.
I was exactly so today I was walking by a school with my husband and these little school children were playing and there's always one or two kids that are just sitting in the snow and just looking, like just looking and totally content with life,
Mm,
right? And I pointed that to my husband. I said, how often do we do that? And why can't we do that? Why do we never do this anymore? We are so not able to even handle even brief periods of doing nothing.
mhm,
And I don't know if that is because of that vacuum inside us or that.
mhm,
So
mhm,
maybe give an example of a person who has existential vacuum and a person who
mhm.
doesn't. What would they do? They're two different. How can we understand whether I have existential vacuum?
Sure. Well, let's talk about that young person in the snow first, and I'll get there, right? I think that's a beautiful image. And I don't know about you, but here in the States, I still blame at my age group, when I was that age, I blame Saturday morning cartoons. Did you guys have that there?
Well, I'm sure they do. I never ever subscribed to cable television in my
No, no,
house,
this
so
this was back in the 1980s and
I'm
early
sure,
90s. No
yes.
cable television.
Yeah.
We would get up early on a Saturday, and it would just be a morning from maybe 7 a.m. to maybe 10 a.m., just a few hours of cartoons
Hmm.
appealing to children, but they were masterful at marketing. This is where many of our terrible, super sugared breakfast cereals were marketed, and all of the toys you could imagine were crammed into these 3 hours every Saturday morning.
I don't know. I didn't
And
grow up here. How
oh,
about you?
fortunate.
I'm
And it
sure.
was, I mean, it was a sugar-fueled rampage of consumerism. And we
Oh,
loved it in the 80s. It was beautiful. But it taught us, again, it really it taught marketers how to appeal to kids, and it really taught us that, if we didn't have these things, we felt less than. And now today, again, with smartphones, there's an amazing book I encourage everybody to take a look at. Johan Hari wrote Stolen Focus. I believe it just came out earlier this year. And first, it's his case study of trying to put down his phone for a few months, and then quite a bit of, really, he interviews industry insiders with Google and a bunch of other tech outlets, and the research is amazing and terrifying. One study indicated, it wasn't even a study, it was a report from the individual that created infinity scrolling. if you remember a time, and this was only a few years ago, when you had your smartphone in your hand, you could only scroll a little bit, and then you would have to press a button or click an icon to load a new page, right? Everybody remembers that. We can all groan like, oh, that took so much time. And they recognize that. They recognize that second or two to load the next page, they lost a lot of people's attention. And so this individual created infinity scrolling. And if you'll notice, when you don't have to do that anymore much of the time. And the estimate was, this was horrifying, that the invention of infinity scrolling, the amount of time people spend now on their phones doing that thumb workout, is estimated to be worldwide about the length of time it has taken humankind to evolve on a daily basis. That's how much more time we're spending on this worldwide. And the people that create it know it, and they continue to feed it to us. So an example of that existential vacuum, it's sad, I just heard it today, is a lonely wife sitting at home asking her husband to pay attention, or vice versa. Don't get me wrong, this is not gender specific. While that other individual sits on their phone, addicted to TikTok, Facebook. TikTok's really the culprit these days. It's just so, it's like those breakfast cereals from the 80s. And just that, what we see in that is that aimlessness, that giving over of our mind and our power to this basic, almost primal source of entertainment. And that, for some people, can go on for hours, and that turns into days. And we lose this goal in life. What are we doing every day? Why do you get up and go to work? Why do you interact with your family? What are, as a couple, what are, as a family even, what are your larger shared goals? Beautiful research from the Gottman Institute on relationships. One of the strongest indicators of a couple and family that will stay together is having shared dreams and goals together. I often ask the families I work with, what's your 1 year plan? What's your 5 year plan? What do you want to do in this family in these years? And sometimes I'm well, they're in therapy or coaching for a reason, but I'm often saddened by those that say, what are you talking about? We don't have any plans. We just get up and go to work.
So then how do you, yeah, okay, so let's get back to the season for the reason. And I was just thinking, okay, existential vacuum, from what I've understood, is that we haven't taken the time to really understand, where are we going? Where am I going? In fact, there is a verse in the Holy Quran that actually says, so where are you going? So it's actually asking us to think. So where are you going? And keeps asking many times in the scripture. And I'm sure in all scriptures, it's always trying to give us a direction. And if we don't know where we are going and why we are going there, then it's very hard to want to even take a step. And probably that is where we are talking about, that there is this vacuum, and now you're trying to fill it in with things.
Things, correct.
Right? So now when we're talking about this season of buying, so as an example, would that be a correct example? A person who has an existential vacuum, they would end up buying a lot of gifts.
Very often. I mean, we've
Right?
seen in our times now with Amazon and our delivery services, it's almost too easy. It becomes addictive in some ways. We see that thing, and then Amazon recognizes, oh, I can sell a little bit more and a little bit more, and we buy, and all these packages come in, and it's, we get a little bit of dopamine, a little dose of feel good chemical, of feel good neurotransmitter in our brain, and we feel, ooh, that's, I got it, and it's here, and now what? And now it's I mean, again, not to speak more than what I live. I just got done reorganizing this little basement office. Sarah, you wouldn't believe some of the stuff I found. I said, oh my gosh, I can't, why did I don't, I don't need that. Like many of these books here, like I had to have those books. Now I commit to reading most of them, but yeah, we live in a time where it's too easy that if we're feeling a little down, a little off, a little disconnected from our partner or our family, we can go satisfy that with a purchase. And
Yeah.
it does give us a dose of dopamine, much like chocolate or cocaine or food. But then that wears off. And what happens when it wears off? Well, then we need to go buy more. And there's plenty of businesses that are very happy to sell us more on a consistent basis.
Yeah, you're right. And I did hear a friend of mine say, so he was off for the COVID period, and we here in Canada we were getting a basic income and doing nothing. Right
Mhm.
now, this guy, he was a business owner, and his business had to shut down, but he was given like just $2,000. The man who was making 10,000 was now just getting 2,000 to do nothing. It was
Mm,
brutal. So
mhm,
what he ended up doing was he found Alibaba, and there he found, oh, look at that. That is like $10, and Amazon is like $50. So yeah, I
mhm,
can do the $10. He said, I bought so much stuff on Alibaba in those 2 years. You won't believe, and I don't even know what it is and why I bought it. And when it came to my doorstep, I was like, why is it here?
yeah.
So then I guess to explain the existential vacuum is that the guy who had a business, he was just made to become useless,
Yeah.
and he did not know like you were talking about the what you're going to do in a year or 2 years. He did not know what he's going to do because things were really,
Mhm.
really bad.
Absolutely.
You just didn't know where it's all going. So now all he could do was spend those $2,000,
Mhm.
right?
One of the worst things that can happen to us as human beings, as human animals, is to interfere with our desire to strive, to grow, to accomplish, to seek meaning, right? So we seek meaning in one of three ways. I think I talked about this last time, but I'll go over it real quick.
Mm,
In our creative activities, in our work, in our hobbies, in our ability to create art or music, right? There's a lot of meaning to find there.
mm,
But our work is a big part of that. My goodness, we go and we spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day, hopefully in this meaningful endeavor. And when that stopped for many people during COVID, it was a national joke here in the US that, oh, look, alcohol sales continue to rise. It was horrifying.
yeah,
And people felt that existential vacuum of not having meaning in their day, just sitting. It was I'm not sure if anybody remembers this, but for us here, there was this horrible show on Netflix called The Tiger King, and everybody watched this ridiculous show and was talking. I'm like, nobody would do this if they had any meaning in their life at that point, but we did. It was terrible. Um, so yes, in our creative endeavors, in our experiences, that's why I promote experience over material. When it comes to the holidays, we can find a lot of meaning and experiences in as we were talking about earlier, traveling, seeing a beautiful sunset, the mountains, the ocean, even the next town over and experiencing a different culture or a fun meal. Just being close with family can be very meaningful.
yeah.
And then, of course, in our attitudes, when we choose our attitudes to aim towards meaning, especially our attitudes in the face of difficulties or suffering, there's opportunities for meaning there. And when that is interrupted, when that is interfered with, when we don't have that opportunity to create, to experience, or to choose our attitudes, that is a source of this malaise, depression, anxiety, combination of very unpleasant feelings that we call the existential vacuum.
Right. So when you talk about the attitude, that freedom is always available to us,
Hmm.
right? So why do we fail to choose to? Okay, so I can understand, right? Okay, in times of COVID, your work is taken away from you, can't do
Hmm.
anything about it.
Hmm.
Uh, you can't create anything.
Hmm.
Uh, you you can't. Okay, fine. If you can't even go and experience the sunshine, that's fine. How
Hmm.
would you, in those situations, change your attitude so you do not end up in that feeling of malaise and
Yeah.
despair?
Well, and I didn't want to be rude and interrupt you, but I was ready to argue with you right from the start, right?
Okay.
Because you can almost always choose to create, right? In most of our homes, we certainly have pencil and paper. We have our laptops. I got bored. I created a podcast, and look where we are now, right? Like that was really COVID was the start of the Meaning Project podcast for me. I really got I went from being absolutely horrible to slightly terrible on the guitar. Tried to do that a little bit. Back there, my daughters and I, we made didgeridoos out of leftover PVC pipes sitting in the garage somewhere or something. There's almost, and I don't want to say always, nearly always opportunities to create something in our times, in our culture right now. If you have a laptop, if you have a computer, there's opportunity to create. So that's that attitude. It's almost too easy sometimes. Many people I knew were choosing way too much time on the TV and in the news. And I mean, we were all interested to see what was going on, especially during the beginning. But it can be really scary sometimes and depressing. And so even in our times now, I instruct many people, and again, this is research based, to limit that time on the news because the news is cultivated to really keep us coming back in unhealthy ways. We can be aware without having the major news channels on 24/7.
Right. So then how do some people, I think that has been a constant conversation in our group here, and
Mhm,
how is it that some of us, and only a few of us, decided to do that, to turn off the TV and
mhm,
to make connections with each other, turn off fear, start to think that, okay, this doesn't, like, okay, we didn't even know initially, like you said, nobody really knew what this was. We were just going by whatever they were throwing at us, that something jumped from the bat to the monkey to the giraffe or whatever.
mhm.
And you're just going with that flow. But after a while, and it didn't take too long for us, I think for me it was March to the June period maximum of 2020,
Mhm.
that I just, for some reason, I just wasn't interested in knowing that anymore. And
Right.
I started growing, and we grew cannabis that year. So I said, let's see what happens. I mean, we hear a lot about cannabis. Let's grow some cannabis in our backyard, and let's do. So why do you think some of us? And so I got disconnected from a big group of friends who were still stuck on their phones, looking at the news, looking at the case counts, then da da da, and they did not understand that
Mhm,
why I was not living in fear. And I
mhm.
did not understand why they were living in fear. And
And
then
there it is.
I found a few people, like here we are, and we started connecting and talking to each other. So what do you think was going on? Why like 20% people turned off the news?
First of all, I'm going to turn your own show on you and say, oh my goodness, we're going to have to talk about this growing cannabis at some point. As the friendly neighborhood substance abuse therapist, like I'm so curious what you did with all this cannabis, especially here in the States, as we look at different states legalizing and others not. And our first ability to really start doing good research. I've been certainly an advocate for continued research and the medicinal and healthy use of cannabis and its byproducts. So um, it's funny to hear somebody be able to say so outright, yeah, we just grew cannabis. I don't get to hear that in Indiana very much, but every state around here certainly does, which leads to a lot of trouble in my practice, I'll tell you. Um, I forgot what the original question was. Now you got me so
Um,
curious about cannabis.
well, we'll do another show on that because I learned
Absolutely.
a heck lot of it, and I never got tipsy. So, somebody even stole one of our plants. Can you believe it? That was just, it was on our backyard. It grew to 7 feet tall, and
My goodness.
it had 1,000 buds in it. And I was learning photography, and I was taking the best pictures of those buds. And then one fine morning, I wake up and the whole plant has just vanished. So, so we'll do a full show on that, I think.
Absolutely. I know many people personally and professionally will be interested in listening to that.
Mhm.
Your question was why some people chose and
Yeah.
others didn't. And that really is, if we go all the way back to the origins of logotherapy and existential analysis, um, Dr. Viktor Frankl, the creator of this, the originator of these theories, spent 3 years in the Nazi concentration camps. And he said the exact same thing. He watched people choose to either try to stay as mentally and emotionally healthy as they could. Surely they couldn't have an impact on their physical health, only so much. And some people chose and others didn't. And much of those 3 years he spent trying to figure out just what the heck that was about. Some people could do it for a little while, and some gave up. He himself, there's a very emotional part in that in the book Man's Search for Meaning, where right before they were about to be liberated, he nearly ran into the wire and committed suicide. And that was just about the time, I mean, how prophetic that was about the times where that camp was liberated. Um, so I would answer that question with all the variability of human nature. There are so many reasons people choose or don't choose, whether it's your history, your belief system, your connections, your friendships. Um, but I think during that time, you're right. Many people chose just to stay in fear and panic and continue to consume more fear and panic. And other people went out and learned a guitar and grew cannabis.
Right. But now you're seeing definitely more people coming out of fear, but
Mhm.
only when the government says that it's okay
Sure,
to take off your
sure.
mask, or they say, so it's very strange and confounding to this group over here. And we're
Yeah.
constantly asking, what, why did we get, and we come from
Mhm.
all kinds of faiths and belief systems
Mhm.
and all kinds of, and we've also said that if it wasn't for COVID, we would probably have never met. Some of
Wow, isn't
us,
that amazing?
yeah,
Isn't
it's
that amazing? And that is truly a beautiful example of logotherapy at work, right? You took a terrible time, a difficult time, you decided to grow and learn from it and connect.
yeah.
And here we are, months later, a year later, still having amazing conversations. Sarah, you're studying logotherapy. You know what we call that, right? That's the noetic, that's the spiritual, that is the great unknown that connects us all together, regardless of what our religious or spiritual background is. We know there's something out there greater than ourselves. And that force, that being, whatever you call it, somehow brought you all together to do these amazing things for yourselves and your families. And that's beautiful. That's truly, you know, sometimes I guess in some of Frankel's work, I would go in and say that is what he describes as just undescribable, indefinable. We can't quite answer that yet.
So what I thought, okay, it was probably easy for me, at least I think. I have a husband, I have a child, I have a home, we had the money to buy food, things turned out a lot better in those realms of physical comfort, financial. I mean, there was a time when we were even thinking, okay, maybe we won't have our jobs left. Maybe we'll have to
Hmm.
sell our home. Maybe
Hmm.
but at least I was not panicking somehow. I don't know why. I have no
Hmm.
reason. No, I want to know what did I do to be on this boat where I didn't panic, because I'm not a person who doesn't ever panic. I mean, I can panic for so many things. I panic for many things every day. But when
Hmm.
it was something like that big, I was able to kind of, let's, yeah, like, hey, we'll see. And there's all of these people here pretty much did the same thing. So I
Hmm.
guess what I'm saying is that how can we understand how to grow this thing for
Hmm.
next? They're already talking about the future pandemic. They're saying the next pandemic, right? So
Can't
we
wait.
I can't wait.
I'm coming up there for all that cannabis.
Uh, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll let people ask questions over here. Gerald, Corey, Hannah, Mohammed,
Sure, sure.
Bridget, do you have any questions so far? okay, well, maybe people will be thinking I don't want to put people on the spot, but so let's bring it to the present. Okay, the
Hmm.
gifting season, the holiday season, and the consumer season.
Hmm. We don't have to let it be the consumer season.
Yeah, but it
Yeah.
is, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it is, and even among the group I'm with, I know there are many people who have been fearless in COVID,
Hmm.
but they're still part of that consumer
Hmm.
COVID.
Hmm.
The consumer pandemic is still there, and
Tell me about that. What do you mean by that?
well, what I mean is that they are already buying lots. They
Mm.
are already thinking what they will get, and that expectation is there.
Hmm.
I'll get this gift and that gift, and or that one can afford more gifts, or that one has a bigger house. I mean, that, and it's really sad. It's really, really sad because I don't even like to give gifts or receive gifts. So I just like, if we celebrate Christmas, I want to just invite friends, have a potluck, come over, and you know what?
Hmm.
I don't need any gifts, but not I don't know many people like that now. Now that is a really small cohort I'm talking about.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I would agree. That is, I mean, that's sad, but I think that's a sign of our times that we live in one of the richest times in human history, right? That and the positive of that is, more and more people are being pulled out of poverty every day. That's a beautiful thing on our planet. Unfortunately, we also have this consumeristic drive to buy and consume. And I believe the more we share these messages and the ideas of logotherapy and experience over material and discovering meaning in our lives, more people will get on board at some point. But, we're all human. We're an imperfect race and we make poor decisions sometimes that harm ourselves and our world.
So what I have observed, and this is observation coming from India, where the haves and have-nots is very, very clear. You can
Hmm.
see,
Hmm.
right? And my parents always made a note of this and explained it to us that when you give money to, like, if you give $100 to someone who already uh, is on the poverty line, and so it's say it's the time of the year, like a holiday time or a Christmas time or whatever, and you give, okay, I'll give you $100, you know enjoy your holiday. They will spend all of it right away. They But when my parents gave the money, they were hoping that they would save some of it and spend some of it,
Hmm.
but they said,
Hmm.
it'll never happen. When a person who is living on the poverty line, and they are already feeling that they are the have not,
Hmm.
and when you give them the money, it'll just finish very fast. They never
Hmm.
explained why that happens. Whereas with us, we weren't super rich or anything. We just were salaried class people, and so we weren't buying many gifts. And the salary would come, a little bit of it would go to savings and pay the bills, and a little bit would be spent for something. So now at Christmas time, um, a person who has less money, and that person is the most likely to spend more money. What advice can we give to them that it is not like the existential vacuum, but explaining those terms is not going to, but
Hmm.
how can we talk to a person who has, say, they have friends who have double the amount of money, and then but at Christmas time they want to match them in everything.
Yeah. Um, well, it's human nature to compare when we see somebody else and we want to be like that, or we recognize, well, I'm not as much this as that. And that leaves us
Mhm.
feeling negative. That leaves us feeling sad, down, depressed, that existential vacuum. And so we talk about mindfulness, to be mindful of the moment and enjoy where you are and what you have in the moment. But you know, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this name here. You guys tell me to give me a thumbs up or a boo, right? Like, so the great Canadian lecturer, Dr. Jordan Peterson.
I like him.
Okay, thumbs up. Good.
I
I've been
don't know
listening to a
about
lot
others.
of his lectures in different ways. He's got a great series on marriage that my wife and I are listening to right now. But even when he did the study, this was an older series of lectures on um, the 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 book of Genesis from the Bible. Um, One of the things he talks about in human psychology, this idea to, oh, how does he say it? The idea of sacrificing for today in hopes of tomorrow, right? And there's so many that that's just not unique to Peterson. That's throughout human history and wisdom texts, right? The Bible, the Torah, the Quran, that those that sacrifice today, that put money away, that sacrifice time for education, that whatever it might be, that prevent that instant gratification, historically, are better off in the long run.
Mhm.
But that is an issue of human development throughout time that we're still trying to figure out. Why do some people choose immediate gratification, especially today in a culture that
Yeah.
promotes instant gratification prolifically so much, through all of our smartphone technology and internet technology, we promote instant gratification. So more people are adhering to that.
Yeah.
And it's a struggle to encourage those people. Hey, if you put off today, if you put that off and wait till tomorrow, you'll have compound interest in education, money, time, family, whatever it might be. That level of discipline is hard to promote.
So I will get to the question. So as I was reading Dr. Viktor Frankl, the way I understood was that the people who choose to, think long term,
Mhm.
um, and it's not like one person will always do the thinking long term. There will be times in my life when I will be able to think long term and put that away, and then there will be times when I will want the instant gratification, right? But the
Mhm.
more I do the long term thinking, the better that habit will kind of cultivate in me.
Absolutely.
So I guess it's when you know why you are doing something and you
Mhm.
find it valuable. I was actually explaining that to my son today. So we got home last night. It was 1 o'clock from his cycling competition, and
Oh my.
then he had to go for his exam this morning. I had to start my work. My husband had to go for work. At 7, he had to leave. And my alarm went off at like 10 to 7, and I got up, I put everything, and I said, do you want me to drop you off? He said, oh, that'll be great. So I said, okay. And then we were talking on my ride, and I said, I don't know what he asked me. He says, I've forgotten the question. I was half asleep, I think. So I said, the only reason I was able to get up this morning is because I'm a mom. I don't think I would get up if I was not a mom, because there's the value
Mhm.
and the meaning in getting up and not turning around and going back to sleep when I've just had 5 hours of sleep. So I think that's where we're talking about that if you have less money, it will always be lesser than somebody else's money,
Mhm.
right? So we need to think about, why do we compare? And when we're getting into a comparison loop, then how would you help someone get out of that?
Well, what you just described was that sacrificial nature of parenting, of relationships, and logotherapy, we call that self-transcendence, that ultimate love for another person. And usually that's identified as a parent for a child or for spouses, right? Like this ultimate love that I would give my sleep for you, and sometimes even maybe my life for you.
Yeah.
And that's the ultimate source of meaning for us, right? Now, I do have to ask Sarah, because I know from the last time we talked, even though you got up late, did you still make him breakfast?
No, not
Oh, my
today.
goodness. Good
No,
for
there was no
you.
time. There was no time.
No time.
So I asked him. Last night before going to bed, I did put some chia seeds in
milk for him in case he can pick it up, because he was already sleeping
I
after
bet. I
three
bet.
races.
Uh,
But yeah,
Good.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and it really is, my belief is the more I get to share these messages of logotherapy and people continue to pick up on it, I have found the world is craving meaning. I spoke to a workplace development day a few weeks ago. I was terrified. I got on the Zoom call. I really thought like I was going to be lucky if I had two people show up, right? Because the title was meaning in the workplace or meaning and purpose in the workplace. I'm like, oh, nobody cares about meaning. Nobody wants to hear any of this stuff. And I just watched the numbers keep ticking. I was like, oh
Mm,
my goodness, this is a sign.
yeah.
People want this. People need this. There's a part of us. Our human spirit recognizes when we're not living in that meaningful way, when we are engaging in too much consumerism, when we're doing the thumb exercise scroll too much on our phones. We recognize it, and it can leave us feeling down, depressed, anxious, and dark. And so the more you share these messages, and everybody here shares this message or makes it part of it may just be sharing it with your own family and saying what you said to your son. You know what? There is no way in this world I would have gotten up this morning except for you, boy. And that's
Right.
because I love you, I care about you, I sacrifice for you. And I hope you learn that and you do that for others. You do that for the people you care about.
So there is a question here from Hannah, and she said she sees there are
Mm.
videos focusing on parts of stolen focus. Do you have any other tips of things one can share with teens directly to make them analyze whether they already do have a phone addiction?
Mhm.
Because she's a school teacher, and she says some kids pull out their phone more than 5 times in a single class.
If you're a school teacher, I would certainly read that book and pull out. I mean, it is such a highly quotable and just it's a good read. It's hard to stomach the facts that are in there, but it's so interesting, especially when you're working with kids. And I mean, he he promotes some groundbreaking kind of things, but really a cultural shift. And that's a hard one to stomach, that we truly need a cultural shift to encourage. And who knows? I'm sure some of us have seen some of the news about Elon Musk taking over Twitter and what he's doing. Maybe he changes it. But what was promoted in Hari's book is this idea that could you imagine if these social media platforms right now they are fed, they are programmed to feed us to keep our attention because attention equals dollars in that domain. But if we change the way those businesses operate, that they profited by feeding us healthy content, by giving us ideas to become better, by maybe even, my goodness, could you imagine if Facebook said, okay, you've had too much, I'm shutting off for the day, go for a walk, go talk to your family. If TikTok said, okay, 4 hours is enough for today, go do something, right? I mean, that would be the ultimate way to do it because we are, and this is, the research in that particular book and other sources of research as well. I joke about the almighty algorithm. It's not a joke. It is programmed to continue to draw our attention. And it really is, I've studied addictions most of my career, and this is probably one of the most highly addictive creations we have right now.
So then
More so.
let me ask you here. So this is an addiction. I mean, it's nothing different than an alcohol addiction, right? It's
Hmm.
way
Hmm.
more accessible than an alcohol bottle is, because you
And
cannot,
legal
yeah,
for all
legal,
ages,
exactly. Like
absolutely.
sugar is the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So there was a period in time when sugar addiction was really high. Now it's moved on to phone addiction.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's really the same thing. So people who tend to get into an addiction, so when it's a harder thing to be addicted to, like alcohol, then you'll have less people addicted to alcohol. When it's an easier thing like sugar to get addicted to, you have more people addicted.
Hmm.
Now in classroom, you cannot keep on having a cake, but now the phone is, go
You
ahead.
got it right there. In a classroom, you can't
Yeah,
do that.
yeah,
But
but the
but
phone you can.
there's no
Yeah,
stigma around it
yeah,
yet.
Yeah.
right? If you're sitting there shoving an
Yeah.
entire cake in your
Yeah.
face on the
People are
school
gonna look
bus,
at you. Yeah.
people are going to look at you, and
No,
there's
yeah.
right. If you're snorting cocaine in
Yeah.
public, there's a
No.
stigma there. If you're
Or
walking
the
around with
cannabis.
exactly, but there's no stigma there yet because there isn't the movement to do that.
But then at the same time, then there are those of us who you can put an alcohol bottle in front of them, or a sugar or phone or a dancing girl or whatever, and somehow they are driven to not be distracted.
Mhm,
Like we see the monks or
mhm,
the whoever, right? So why do they practice that, and why do they live those lives of discipline, while most of us, we are willing to let ourselves just slide and become like
mhm,
slippery,
mhm.
god knows what.
Well, and I would say this group probably doesn't do that, right? Because the fact that you connect and you have these conversations and you learn these kinds of things, that would not be something I'd expect of this group. But as a society, as a culture right now, we're only into this experiment of the internet and smartphones for maybe a decade, right? I don't remember how old Facebook is,
Yeah,
but it can't
but
be much
it's
more,
really
maybe a little
just
bit more
10
than a
years.
decade.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're starting to see the ill effects of it. And it's going to take, I'm not sure what, but in those classrooms, again, Hannah, I would certainly read that book. A few years ago, Netflix had a show called The Social Dilemma
Yeah,
that was
yeah, I've seen
very
it. Yeah,
similar.
yeah. Mhm.
And I know there are other ones like that out there, but I mean, for the classroom environment, for the home environment, you need to have times where we're not on our phones. And maybe there is a stigma around it in your own private environment. I know here, I can be a really terrible husband and father when I say, I'll start a conversation and I'll look and I'll say, oh, sorry, you're on your phone. You must not be paying attention. And of course, I am met with an eye roll and a sigh, sometimes a growl. Ugh. But here, I won't speak to anybody if they're staring at their phone, and I'll really be quite obnoxious about it. And I expect the same from myself as well. There are times when I'm down here and I'm working on a really important video game or something, that if somebody comes down and says, oh, give me just a second, I want to make sure I put that down and give you undivided attention, right?
That comes down to your values, right? Like your own ethics, and then again, I think we've got the last 5 minutes. I guess we're really, in all of this that we've talked today, we're really talking about, it's not the external environment that we can hope will change, so we will change, but we have to first recognize. However, with youngsters, with children, with teenagers, we as parents have to provide that environment,
Yeah.
and then they will be driven. So
Mm.
like I see with my son, he's driven for his races, and but when he's not racing, then it's the phone. So
Mm.
so we have to somehow find ways to engage, or find out from our children, what is it that lights them up, what is it that is their life force, and really start to pay attention when they were a child, what is it that they were gravitating towards, and present more opportunities for them to experience that, and sit down and create, like the three things you said, the create and experience and the attitude. But as parents, I find, I don't know about, maybe everyone else is a lot better, I find changing my attitude is the hardest, especially when and I guess maybe our next call will be on, what do we do to change our attitude in a bad situation?
Well, when it comes to changing our attitude with our teenagers, I'm going to have to request you pull in a different expert because I haven't quite figured that one out yet.
Well,
I
you
can
have a month
preach,
to figure it out.
I can preach on that one, but there is an 18-year-old up there that just knows
Yeah,
exactly
Yeah.
we have, and I can recognize that. Again, I've studied psychology much of my adult life. I know what's going on there. I know what happens to me. I know what the interaction, what the dance is, and I still
To
can't
fall for it.
always prevent it, right?
Well, maybe next time you can give us some tips, because I find it's really hard to hold myself back when my child or my husband is being very, very unreasonable. So how can I'm not a monk? And how do I,
Right.
like it's one thing that the prime minister is being unreasonable, and then I can look at millions of memes, I can go and tweet, and I can do like a whatever, and I'm fine, and it's over. But what do I do with the family or with the boss, or you know?
I will. I mean, I have much to say on that, but there's a great book. Oops, change shelves. Dr. Elizabeth Lucas
Yes.
is a student of Dr. Frankel's, and she wrote some amazing work
Yeah.
on the family and logotherapy. So I'll pull some information out of that one as well. But it really, what I love about logotherapy is the theories are so simple, but it really takes a lot of work and a lifetime to put them to work. And the idea that, I mean, it's to do that in a family is very simple. You always look to step outside yourself to serve those around you,
Yeah.
and you're going to be fine. But the human condition is sometimes when that 18-year-old or that young man in your family gives you that look that they've given you several thousand times, and it hits you right in the adrenaline, and you go, oh, it's hard. It's human nature. That same repetition, that same pattern. You know what the outcome is going to be because you've experienced it several thousand times interacting with the same person. And it comes down to realizing that and trying to pause. Dr. Frankl says between stimulus and response is the opportunity to pause. There's something, no, how's it? Sarah,
Yeah,
do you know that one? Between
I
stimulus and
remember.
response is,
Yeah.
yeah, we,
There's
we get to
you have
we
a
get to
choice to
pause.
make. Yeah, which
There's a choice,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, and that's hard because the other part of human nature is when that stimulus repeats itself over and over and over again, it becomes a behavioral pattern just to respond. We forget to think,
Yeah.
right? And for teenagers, I mean, their most favorite stimulus to share with their parents is an eye roll and a growl, right? Ugh.
Yeah.
And what does that do to us? Oh,
Totally.
right? And so before we get to, we have to take
Yeah.
that breath. Oh my gosh, I love you, child. I really do. Right now, I don't like you, but I really love you. And I want to act out of love. And sometimes acting out of love means we'll come back to this. I need to take a break. Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn around and walk away. There was a time quickly, when both my daughters were at home, they shared the upstairs area of the house. And whenever there were shenanigans going on, or I perceived there were shenanigans or an argument, I could start tensing, and I could feel myself as I walked up the steps, each step getting a little bit more unreasonable, a little bit more angry, thinking of the fury that was going to come out of my face. And when I made that realization, now it took a couple of these interactions before I said, "Oh my God, what am I doing? I have to stop walking up those steps. I'll just yell at them." No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I didn't do that. But I recognized like when I got to those steps, stimulus, response, I had to pause to take that breath. So,
Yeah, no, that I guess that could be something to really, it's a practice, and like we practice yoga,
mhm,
it, but again, you have to understand why is it more in my advantage to do that
mhm,
rather than react,
mhm,
or and or how to understand the cues, like if we all could become psychologists like you.
yeah, right. Recognizing that tension, that adrenaline, that,
Yeah, yeah. We
yeah,
don't recognize
absolutely.
that it's a very primitive something.
Yeah, it's back there in that lizard brain.
All right. Well, it's been an hour and
It's
a
been a pleasure.
great time. So
Remember, experience over material, do things out of love with your family, enjoy time with them. happy holidays. Enjoy that time with them.
Yes, happy holidays, everybody, and we'll find a date in January. Okay, take care.
Wonderful.
Have
Take
a
care.
good night.
You too.
Bye. You're welcome. Bye.